In the Sterling household, blood wasn't a bond. It was a currency. On Violet's 18th birthday, the gift wasn't a car or a celebration, but a one-way ticket to hell. Catherine Sterling bartered Violet's life to a monster to secure her own daughter's safety. Catherine assumed she was delivering Violet to a certain death at the hands of upstate New York's crippled vampire king. However, she overlooked a vital truth. Monsters recognize their own. What followed wasn't the tragedy Catherine planned, but a bloody reckoning ignited by a single signature on damp parchment. It was raining in Albany, the night Violet's life ended. Not a romantic, movie-style rain, but the kind of freezing sleet that gets into the bones and stays there. Violet sat at the kitchen table of their cramped townhouse, staring at a cupcake with a single, unlit candle. "Happy birthday, Violet," she whispered to herself. The front door slammed open, letting in a gust of icy wind. Her stepmother, Catherine, walked in, shaking her umbrella with a violence that made Violet flinch. Behind her trailed her stepsister, Jessica. Jessica was everything Violet wasn't. Blonde, petite, and currently sobbing into a designer handkerchief. "Stop crying, Jess. I handled it," Catherine snapped, throwing her soaking trench coat onto the sofa Violet had just cleaned. She looked at her stepdaughter, her eyes narrowing. They were the color of cold coffee, flat and bitter. "Violet, sit up straight. We have guests coming." "Guests?" Violet asked, standing up. "It's 11 at night. Important guests. Mr. Renfield is coming to collect." Violet's stomach dropped. They all knew about the debt. Her father, before he passed, had been a good man, but a terrible gambler. He'd borrowed money from people you don't borrow from. Shadow banks, private lenders with no websites, and no mercy. Since he died, Catherine had been managing the finances, which mostly meant buying Jessica new clothes while they ate instant noodles. "I thought we had more time," Violet said, her voice trembling. "We don't," Jessica wailed, throwing herself into a chair. "He wants me, Violet. He said the contract stipulates a blood payment of the firstborn daughter if the cash isn't ready. He wants to take me to him." Him. They didn't say his name in the house, but they knew the rumors. Sebastian Croix, the recluse who owned half the real estate in the tri-state area and lived in a fortress called Blackwood Hall. The tabloids called him a billionaire eccentric. The dark corners of the internet, the forums Violet wasn't supposed to read, called him something else. They said he drank blood. They said he was hundreds of years old, and they said he was broken, crippled in a war that never made the history books. "He's not taking you, Jess," Catherine said, her voice surprisingly calm. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. She tossed it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right next to Violet's sad little cupcake. "What is this?" Violet asked. "A modification," Catherine said. "I spoke to Mr. Renfield's associates. They don't care which daughter it is, Violet. They just want a Sterling girl, a warm body to serve at Blackwood Hall." Violet froze. The room went silent, save for the ticking of the clock and Jessica's wet sniffling. "I'm not a Sterling," Violet said quietly. "I kept my mother's maiden name, remember?" "Your father adopted you legally when you were 3, Catherine said, a cruel smile touching her lips. "On paper, you are Violet Sterling, and you are 18 as of—" She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. "3 hours ago. You're an adult. You can sign." "I'm not signing that," Violet said, backing away. "You're crazy." Catherine took a step forward. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a PTA mum, wearing a Talbot sweater and pearls. That was the scary part. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little leech. Your father left us with millions in debt. If you don't go, they take Jessica. Jessica is delicate. She's studying fashion. She has a future. You're working double shifts at a diner. You're tough. You can handle a cripple in a wheelchair." "He's a vampire, Catherine!" Violet screamed. "Everyone knows—" "He's a wealthy invalid," she screamed back. "And if you don't do this, I will tell the police about that little incident with the pills in your room last year. I'll make sure you go to prison for possession with intent to distribute. Who will they believe? The grieving widow or the troubled stepdaughter?" It was a lie. The pills were Jessica's. Violet had taken the blame to keep her from getting expelled. Violet looked at Jessica, hoping for support. She just looked away, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, Violet," Jessica whispered, "but I really can't go. I have prom next month." That was the moment it broke. The little thread of hope that Violet had a family snapped. She looked at the contract. It was heavy, the paper thick and expensive. The text was in Latin and English, service for a term of 1 lifetime. There was a heavy knock at the door, 3 slow, rhythmic raps. Catherine shoved a pen into Violet's hand. "Sign it, Violet, or watch your sister die right now. Those men outside aren't Uber Eats." Violet's hand shook. She looked at the cupcake one last time. Happy birthday to her. She signed. The car ride was silent. The associates were 2 men who looked like NFL linebackers wearing funeral suits. They didn't speak, didn't blink, and didn't let Violet bring anything other than the clothes on her back and a small backpack. They drove north for 4 hours, leaving the city lights far behind. The GPS on the dashboard eventually just showed a black void. They were deep in the Adirondacks, where the trees grew too close together, and the cell service went to die. They arrived at the gates of Blackwood Hall, just as the sun threatened to rise, though the heavy grey clouds strangled any real light. The gates were iron, twisted into shapes that looked like screaming faces. They swung open without a sound. The house, no, the fortress, was massive. It was Victorian Gothic, all black stone and jagged spires looming over a cliff edge, but it was in disrepair. Ivy choked the windows. Gargoyles were missing chunks of stone. It looked like a beast that was slowly dying. The car stopped. The driver got out and opened Violet's door. "Go," he grunted. "You're not coming in?" she asked, clutching her backpack straps. "We don't go past the threshold," he said, and for the first time, Violet saw fear in his eyes. He got back in the car and sped off, tires screeching on the gravel, leaving her alone in the mist. Violet walked up the stone steps. They were slick with moss. The massive oak door had no doorbell, only a heavy iron knocker shaped like a wolf's head. She reached for it, but before she could touch the cold metal, the door creaked open. Standing there was not a butler, but a woman. She was elderly, severe, dressed in a housekeeper's uniform from the 1920s. Her name, Violet would learn, was Mrs. Higgins. "You are the Sterling girl?" she asked. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping on pavement. "Violet," she corrected. "Come. The master does not like to be kept waiting, though he likely won't see you. He rarely sees anyone." Violet followed her inside. The interior was freezing. The air smelled of old dust, beeswax, and something metallic, like copper or blood. The furniture was covered in white sheets, making the grand hallway look like a graveyard of ghosts. "Where is everyone?" Violet asked, her voice echoing. "There is no everyone. Just me, and the master." She led Violet up a grand staircase that spiraled into the shadows. "You are here to be a companion, a donor, if required. But mostly, you are here because a debt must be paid." Is he really a—" Violet couldn't say it. Mrs. Higgins stopped on the landing and turned to her. Her eyes were milky. "He is what he is, child. Just remember the rules. Never open the curtains in the West Wing. Never enter the basement. And never ever ask him about his legs." She led Violet to a heavy mahogany door at the end of a long, dark corridor. "He is in there. Introduce yourself. Do not stare." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows remarkably fast for an old woman. Violet took a deep breath. "You survived, Catherine," she told herself. "You can survive this." She pushed the door open. The room was a library, 2 stories high, filled with books that smelled of rot and wisdom. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the day. The only light came from a roaring fireplace that did little to warm the room. In the center of the room, facing the fire, was a wheelchair. It was an antique thing, made of wood and leather, with large spoked wheels. "I didn't order a new pet," a voice came from the chair. It was a baritone, smooth as velvet but cold as ice. I told Renfield the debt was settled with money. The money ran out, Violet said, her voice stronger than she felt, so you got me instead. The chair slowly turned. Violet gasped. She couldn't help it. Sebastian Croix was devastating. That was the only word for it. He was pale, yes, with high cheekbones and hair the colour of midnight that fell into his eyes. But he wasn't ugly. He was beautiful in a terrifying, sharp way. But then she saw the rest of him. He was wearing a silk dressing gown. But his legs were covered by a thick blanket, yet, even under the fabric, they looked wrong, twisted, atrophied, and his hands, they rested on the armrests, trembling slightly. They were scarred, covered in thin, silvery lines that looked like runes burned into the skin. His eyes, however, were the most striking. They were red, not glowing, laser red, but a deep, dark crimson, like wine held up to a candle. He looked at her with pure disgust. "A child," he scoffed. "Renfield sent me a child. Tell me, girl, do you have any idea what happens to warm things in a house of cold?" "I'm 18, Violet said, stepping into the room. "And I'm not a thing. I'm Violet. Violet," he repeated, tasting the name. He wheeled himself forward, the mechanism squeaking loudly in the silence. He stopped inches from her. The smell of him hit her. Wood smoke, rain, and that underlying scent of iron. "You smell like fear, Violet. And cheap vanilla soap." "It's birthday cake soap," she muttered defensively. "It was a gift." He laughed, a dry, humourless sound. "A birthday. How tragic. You spend your first day of freedom walking into a prison." He reached out, his scarred hand hovering near her face. Violet flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he gripped her chin. His fingers were freezing. "Look at me," he commanded. She looked into those crimson eyes. For a second, she felt a pull in her chest, a strange, tugging sensation behind her navel. His eyes widened slightly. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "Get out," he snarled, turning his chair around violently. "Get out of my sight." "But Mrs. Higgins said, I don't care what the hag said. Get out. Go to your room and lock the door, and pray I don't get hungry tonight." Violet didn't need to be told twice. She ran out of the library, the heavy door slamming shut behind her by itself, echoing through the empty halls like a gunshot. As she leaned against the wall, catching her breath, she heard a sound from inside the room. It was the sound of glass shattering, followed by a scream of pure, agonizing pain. "What have you done to me, Catherine?" Violet thought, sliding down the wall to the floor. "What is this place?" But deep down, a terrifying thought began to take root. When he touched her, when his cold skin touched hers, she didn't just feel fear. She felt a spark. The first week at Blackwood Hall was a study in isolation. Violet didn't see Sebastian. She barely saw Mrs. Higgins. Her world was reduced to the four walls of her room, which, to be fair, was nicer than any room she'd ever had in Catherine's house, and the long, dusty corridors she roamed during the day. She wasn't a prisoner, exactly. The front door was unlocked. But where would she go? She was 20 miles from civilization, with no money, no phone, and a stepmother who would likely shoot her if she showed up on her doorstep. So she stayed. She decided if she was going to be a companion, she wasn't going to be a ghost. She started cleaning. It was a nervous tic she developed living with Catherine. If she was cleaning, she wasn't getting yelled at. She tackled the library first. She was on a ladder, dusting the top shelf of a section on medieval alchemic theory, when she heard the hum of the electric motor. Violet froze. Sebastian was there, watching her from the doorway. He looked worse than he had the first night. His skin was the colour of parchment, and there were dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. He was gripping the armrests of his wheelchair so hard his knuckles were white. "I didn't tell you to touch my books," he said. His voice was raspy, lacking the velvet power it had before. "They were dusty," she said, climbing down, "and you weren't using them." "I don't use them because I can't reach them," he snapped. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Violet paused, holding the feather duster. It was such a human admission of weakness. The vampire king, the monster of the Adirondacks, defeated by a high shelf. "Well," she said, walking over to the shelf and pulling down a heavy, leather-bound volume he had been staring at. "Now you have someone who can." She walked over to him. He flinched as she approached, his upper lip curling to reveal the tips of sharp, white fangs. It was a warning. "Stay back." Violet ignored it. She placed the book on his lap. It was The Architecture of Sorrow, a book of poetry. "You're a bold little thing, aren't you?" he whispered, his hand resting on the book. "Or just stupid?" "Probably stupid," she admitted. "My stepmother always said I didn't have the brains for survival, just the back for labor." Sebastian looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He wasn't looking at her neck. He was looking at her eyes. "She sounds like a charmer." "Catherine, was it?" "Yeah, Catherine." "And the sister? The one you replaced?" "Jessica. She's the golden child. Pretty, fragile. The kind of girl who faints at the sight of a spider." "And you?" Sebastian wheeled closer, trapping her between his chair and the desk. "Do you faint at the sight of spiders, Violet?" "No," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I step on them." A corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. Good, because there are worse things than spiders in this house. Suddenly a spasm of pain racked his body. He gasped, his back arching off the chair, his hands clawing at his useless legs. The book slid to the floor with a thud. "Sebastian!" Violet reached out to steady him. "Don't touch me!" he roared, his eyes flashing a bright, glowing crimson. A wave of invisible force hit her, knocking her backward into the desk. He wheezed, clutching his chest. "Get out! I need the medicine. Get Higgins!" "No," she said, seeing the agony on his face. "Tell me where it is." "The drawer," he gritted out. "The syringe." Violet ripped open the desk drawer. There was a velvet case inside, containing a silver syringe and a vial of thick, dark red liquid. It wasn't blood. It smelled like sulfur and ozone. She fumbled with it, her hands shaking. "Do it," he commanded, his head lolling back. "In the neck." She didn't hesitate. She uncapped the needle and plunged it into the side of his neck. He didn't even flinch. She pushed the plunger down. Almost instantly the tension left his body. He slumped into the chair, his breathing leveling out. The red glow in his eyes faded to a dull maroon. They stayed like that for a long time, Violet standing over him with the empty syringe, him breathing heavily. "What is that?" she asked quietly. "Synthetic," he murmured, his eyes closed. "Real blood. Human blood. It makes the curse worse. It makes the rot spread. I have to starve myself to keep the infection from reaching my heart." "The infection?" Violet looked at his blanket-covered legs. "Is that why?" "I wasn't born this way, Violet," he said, his voice laced with an ancient sadness. "I was a soldier once, a king. Then I was betrayed by my own brother. He used a blade coated in the venom of a basilisk. It eats magic, it eats vitality. It took my legs first. Now it wants the rest." He opened his eyes. They looked incredibly human in that moment. "You should leave, Violet. Run away. Renfield won't chase you. I won't let him. You don't deserve to watch a cripple die in a big, empty castle." Violet looked at the syringe, then at him. She thought about Catherine, about the cold apartment, about being invisible her whole life. Then she looked at this powerful, broken creature who was trying to save her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I paid a debt. I intend to see it through." 3 weeks later, the storm of the century hit upstate New York. The power lines went down instantly. Blackwood Hall was plunged into darkness, lit only by the flashes of lightning that illuminated the gargoyles outside. Violet was in the kitchen, trying to light a gas burner to make tea, when she heard the crash. It came from the west wing, the forbidden area. She grabbed a flashlight and ran. The air in the west wing was freezing, colder than the rest of the house. She followed the sound of ragged breathing to a room at the end of the hall. The door was smashed open. Inside, the room was destroyed. Furniture was overturned, paintings slashed. and in the center of the room, Sebastian was on the floor. He had fallen out of his chair. He was dragging himself across the rug, trailing blood. Not red blood, black blood. "Sebastian!" Violet screamed, dropping the flashlight. She ran to him, sliding on the polished floor. She tried to lift him, but he was dead weight, dense and heavy like marble. "Leave me!" he groaned. His skin was burning hot. The synthetic, it's not working anymore. The storm, the pressure, it accelerates the poison. He coughed, and black ichor splattered onto his white shirt. He looked at her, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Run, Violet. I'm going to lose control. If I smell you, if I taste you." "You said human blood makes it worse," she cried, trying to pull him up. "It does," he snarled, shoving her away with surprising strength. "It feeds the beast, but rots the man. But right now, the beast is starving." He lunged. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was instinct. He pinned Violet to the floor, his heavy body crushing hers. His fangs were fully extended, glistening in the lightning flashes. He snarled near her ear, the sound more animal than human. Violet was terrified. But beneath the terror there was that spark again, that magnetic pull. She looked up at him, at the sweat beading on his forehead, the agony in his eyes as he fought his own nature. "Sebastian, look at me!" she shouted, cupping his face. "You are not a monster. You are a king." He froze, his fangs inches from her throat. He was trembling violently. "I can't," he whimpered. "The pain." "Take it," she whispered. He pulled back, confused. "What?" "My blood," she said. "Not to kill, just to heal. Maybe the synthetic is the problem. Maybe you need something real. I will drain you," he warned, his voice breaking. "Once I start. I trust you," she said, and she meant it. She tilted her head to the side, exposing the pulse of her carotid artery. It was a chaotic, thrumming rhythm. He made a sound that was half sob, half growl, and buried his face in her neck. The pain was sharp, immediate, and blinding, but it was followed by a rush of endorphins that made her toes curl. She felt her life force being pulled out, a warm stream connecting them. But then, something strange happened. As he drank, Violet didn't feel weaker. She felt hot. A golden heat spread from her chest, flowing into him. Sebastian tore himself away with a gasp. He rolled off her, lying on his back, panting. Violet sat up, clutching her neck. The wound was already closing. That wasn't normal. "Violet," Sebastian whispered. She looked at him. The black veins that usually climbed his neck were receding. The color was returning to his face. And then he moved his legs. It was just a twitch at first. Then he bent his right knee. He stared at it in horror and wonder. "How?" he breathed. "My legs. I haven't felt them in 50 years. He looked at her, his eyes wide. "What are you?" "I'm just Violet," she said, her voice shaky. "No," he said, pushing himself up into a sitting position. He reached out and took her hand. He brought it to his lips, kissing the knuckles. "No human blood does this. It heals the rot. It pushes back the poison." He looked at the wound on her neck, which was now just a faint pink scar. Catherine didn't know, he realized, his voice hardening. She sold you as livestock. She didn't know she was holding a golden blood. A what? A universal donor for the supernatural, he explained, his intensity returning. Your blood is worth billions on the black market. If the council knew you existed, if my brother knew. He gripped her hand tighter. You are not safe here, Violet. Not anymore. I thought I was protecting you from the world, but I'm the one putting you in danger just by keeping you near me. I don't care, she said. You walked. You moved your leg, Sebastian. He looked down at his legs, then back at her. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a fierce, possessive fire. Yes, he said, I did. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. For the first time, he didn't feel cold. He felt like a furnace. I will burn the world down before I let anyone touch you, he vowed into her hair. The moment was shattered by the sound of a car horn blaring outside the gates. They pulled apart. Sebastian's face shifted from lover to warrior. Who is that? Violet asked. Sebastian wheeled himself to the window, pulling himself up to look out. "It's a Mercedes," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "and it has a vanity plate." Violet's stomach dropped. Catherine. The timing couldn't have been worse. Or perhaps, knowing Catherine, it was calculated perfectly. The storm had passed, leaving the morning grey and wet. By the time Violet got downstairs, Mrs. Higgins had already opened the door. Catherine stood in the grand foyer, shaking a wet umbrella onto the priceless Persian rug. Jessica was behind her, looking terrified, but also strangely eager, clutching a new Louis Vuitton bag. "Violet!" Catherine exclaimed, her voice echoing fake warmth. "My God, look at you, you're pale. Is he feeding you?" "I'm fine, Catherine," Violet said, standing at the bottom of the stairs. "What are you doing here?" "We came to check on you," Jessica chirped, stepping forward. "And—" "Well, Mum said there was a paperwork issue." "An issue," Catherine corrected, stepping deeper into the hall. "I spoke to Mr. Renfield this morning. Apparently the contract had a clause about unforeseen assets." She looked Violet up and down, like she was a prize horse. "Mr. Renfield mentioned that Mr. Qua has been unusually active lately, ordering new medical equipment. It made us wonder if perhaps the collateral we gave him was more valuable than we thought. She knew. Somehow, she knew about the blood. Or at least, she suspected. "Get out," Violet said. "Now, Violet, don't be rude. We're family. You sold me." "I saved us," Catherine snapped, her mask slipping. "And now, I'm here to renegotiate. If you're worth more, we deserve a cut. Jessica needs tuition for Milan. Get out of my house." The voice didn't come from Violet. It came from the top of the stairs. Catherine and Jessica looked up and gasped. Sebastian was there. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He was standing. He was gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity, and he was shaking, sweat beading on his brow. But he was standing. He was tall, over 6 feet, and imposed a silhouette of pure nightmare and nobility. He had dressed in a black suit that fit him perfectly. Mr. Qua?" Catherine stammered, taking a step back. "I was told you were indisposed." "I was," Sebastian said. He took a step down. It was agonizingly slow, a testament to sheer will, but he took it. Then another. "But Violet has a way of motivating me." He reached the bottom of the stairs, breathing hard, and moved to stand beside her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, partly to support himself, partly to claim her. "You are trespassing," Sebastian said calmly. "We have a contract." Catherine waved a piece of paper. "It says the Sterling family retains rights to visitation and—" Sebastian snatched the paper from her hand. It burst into blue flames. Jessica screamed. Catherine went pale. "The contract is void," Sebastian said, "because the debt is paid. Violet is not my payment. She is my partner." "Partner?" Jessica squeaked. "You mean, like—" "I mean, she is the lady of Blackwood Hall," Sebastian lied. Or maybe he wasn't lying. "And as such, she decides who enters. Violet?" He looked down at her. His crimson eyes were burning. He was trusting her to wield the power he was giving her. Violet looked at Catherine. She saw the fear in her eyes, but also the greed. She wasn't scared for Violet. She was scared she was losing her ATM. "Go," Violet said, "and don't come back. If you do, I won't stop him from doing what vampires do." Catherine narrowed her eyes. "You ungrateful, wretched girl. You think he loves you? He's a monster. He's using you for your blood. Once he's healed, he'll toss you aside like garbage." "Maybe," Violet said, "but he's never lied to me." "You have." "Fine," Catherine spat. "Come on, Jessica. This place smells like death anyway." She turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she stopped and looked back with a malicious grin. "Oh, one more thing, Violet. Since you're so grown up now, you should know the truth about your biological father. The man I saved you from adopting." "Don't listen to her," Sebastian warned, his grip tightening on Violet's waist. "He didn't die in a car crash," Catherine said, her voice dripping with poison. "He was hunted. By them." She pointed a manicured finger at Sebastian. "Your father was a hunter, Violet. He killed Sebastian's brother. That's why Sebastian bought you. It wasn't for the debt. It was for revenge. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine laughed, a cold, sharp sound, and slammed the heavy oak door behind her. Violet stood frozen. She felt Sebastian's body tense against hers. She looked up at him, begging him to deny it, begging him to tell her it was just another one of Catherine's lies. But Sebastian didn't look at her. He was staring at the door, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of a guilt so deep it looked like drowning. He let go of her waist. Without his support, he swayed, his legs giving out. He collapsed back into the wheelchair that Mrs. Higgins had silently rolled up behind him. "Sebastian?" Violet whispered. "Is it true?" He looked at his hands, the hands that had held her so gently just moments ago. "I didn't know it was you," he said, his voice hollow. "Not until I tasted your blood. The blood of a hunter carries a specific bitterness." "So you knew," she said, stepping away from him. "Last night, when I saved you, you knew I was the daughter of the man who killed your brother." "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "I was afraid you would stop," he said, looking up, "and I was selfish. I wanted to walk again." The betrayal hit her harder than the cold rain. She had given him her blood, her trust, her heart, and to him, she was just the daughter of his enemy. A medical dispenser. "I can't stay here," she said, her voice breaking. "Violet, wait! No!" she shouted. "Don't come near me!" She turned and ran. She ran up the stairs, past the library, past the room where they had shared that intimate, life-changing moment. She ran to her room and locked the door, sliding down against it as the sobs finally overtook her. She was trapped. Outside, Catherine was waiting to sell her again. Inside, Sebastian had lied to her. She was alone, or so she thought. A soft scratching sound came from her window. She looked up. They were on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony. Violet walked over and opened the curtains, hanging upside down. Staring at her with yellow, slit-pupilled eyes was a creature. It wasn't a vampire. It was something worse. It smiled, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "Hello, little hunter," it hissed. "Your father missed one." The glass exploded inward before Violet could even scream. The creature, a varga, a twisted hybrid of man and wolf that smelled of wet fur and rotting meat, crashed onto her bedroom floor. It shook off the shards of glass like water. It was massive, hunchbacked, its spine protruding through pale, mange-ridden skin. "Golden blood," it hissed, saliva dripping from its jaws. "Sweet. Rare." Violet scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. Her mind was racing, paralyzed by the terror of the supernatural world that had swallowed her whole. But then, something strange happened. As the beast lunged, time seemed to slow down. Her heart didn't flutter. It dropped into a slow, heavy rhythm. Her vision sharpened. She saw the creature's trajectory. She saw the weak point in its shoulder where the muscle had torn. Your father was a hunter. She didn't think. Her hand shot out and grabbed a heavy silver letter opener from the nightstand. It was a pathetic weapon against a monster, but she moved with a speed she didn't know she possessed. The varga swiped at her. Violet ducked, actually ducked under a blur of claws that should have taken her head off, and jammed the silver blade into its exposed shoulder. The creature howled, a sound that vibrated in her teeth. It backhanded her, sending her flying across the room. She hit the wall hard, the breath leaving her lungs. "Nasty little girl," it growled, pulling the letter opener out. Smoke rose from the wound. "Renfield said you were soft. He lied." Renfield. Catherine hadn't just told Violet the truth about her father to hurt her. She had leaked her location to Sebastian's enemies. She was double-dipping on the profits of Violet's life. The varga crouched to spring, ready to finish her. Violet couldn't move. Her ribs were burning. She closed her eyes, waiting for the teeth. Boom! The bedroom door didn't open. It disintegrated. Splinters of mahogany flew everywhere as a black blur slammed into the varga. It was Sebastian. He wasn't the frail invalid in the wheelchair anymore. He was a force of nature. He tackled the beast, driving it through the ruined window and out onto the balcony ledge. They grappled in the rain, a mess of claws and fangs. Violet dragged herself up, ignoring the pain in her side. She had to help him. He was strong, but he was still healing. He hadn't fed enough. She ran to the window. Sebastian had the creature by the throat, dangling it over the 3-story drop to the jagged rocks below. But the Varga had its claws buried deep in Sebastian's chest, ripping through his suit and the flesh beneath. "Die, King!" the Varga shrieked. "The Council sends its regards!" Sebastian's eyes were glowing so bright they looked like flares. He didn't scream. He just smiled, a cruel, terrifying baring of fangs. "Tell the Council," Sebastian snarled, his voice sounding like grinding stones, "that I am not done." With a sickening crunch, Sebastian crushed the creature's windpipe and hurled it backward. It fell silently into the darkness of the ravine. Sebastian slumped against the stone railing, clutching his chest. His suit was soaked in blood, his own. He slid down to the cold, wet stone of the balcony floor. "Sebastian!" Violet fell to her knees beside him. The wounds on his chest were deep, not healing. The Varga's claws must have been poisoned or cursed. "Violet!" he wheezed, his face grey. Did it touch you?" "No," she cried, pressing her hands against his chest to staunch the flow. "You saved me. Again. Why?" "I'm a hunter's daughter. I'm the enemy." He looked up at her, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He reached up, his bloody hand trembling, and cupped her cheek. "You are not your father," he whispered, "and I am not my brother. My brother was a sadist, Violet. He killed for sport. Your father killed him to save a village of innocents. I didn't hate your father. I respected him." Violet froze. You respected him?" "He was the only man who ever beat a Qua in fair combat." Sebastian smiled weakly. "When I saw you, when I tasted the lineage in your blood, I wasn't angry. I was terrified." "Terrified of what?" "That you would finish the job," he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "That you would see me for the monster I am and destroy me. So I lied. I wanted you to stay. I wanted just a few more days of feeling alive." His hand slipped from her cheek, his breathing hitched. "Sebastian!" She shook him. "Sebastian, stay with me." "Too deep," he gasped. "The poison, Varga venom. It stops the regeneration." "What do I do?" she screamed into the storm. "Tell me what to do." "Leave," he whispered. "Take the car. Go." "No." Violet grabbed his collar. "I am not Catherine. I don't run away. I pay my debts." She pulled her hair back, baring her neck. The rain was freezing, but her blood felt like it was boiling beneath her skin. "Drink," she commanded. "I can't," he mumbled. "I'll kill you. I'm too weak to stop." "Then I'll stop you," she said. "I'm a hunter, remember? I'm tough." She pressed herself against him, forcing his face to her neck. The scent of her blood, mixing with the rain, was too much for him to resist. He groaned, a sound of pure hunger, and his fangs pierced her skin. It was different this time. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate. Violet felt the pull on her soul, the draining of her very essence. Her vision began to spot with black. Her limbs went cold. "He's taking too much," a voice in her head warned. "Push him away." But she held on. She wrapped her arms around his head, threading her fingers through his wet hair. She felt the magic in her blood, the golden fire, rush into him. Heal him, she thought, pushing every ounce of her will into the transfer. Heal him, you stubborn idiot. The world tilted. The rain turned into a dull roar. The last thing Violet felt was Sebastian's body stiffening, a surge of heat, and then darkness. The first thing Violet noticed was the silence. For her entire life, silence had been a terrifying thing. In Catherine's house, silence meant she was plotting. In the early days at Blackwood Hall, silence meant Violet was alone in a tomb. But this silence was different. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of burning hickory and expensive lavender. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her wasn't the cracked plaster of her old room, nor the dark, cobwebbed beams of the guest quarters. It was a fresco of storm clouds and angels, illuminated by the soft glow of a roaring fireplace. She was lying in a bed that felt vast, buried under sheets of spun silk that felt like water against her skin. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down. Her hand flew to her neck. The skin there was tender, covered by a neat, sterile bandage, but the jagged, tearing pain she remembered was gone. "Careful," a voice spoke from the shadows near the hearth. "You've been asleep for nearly 4 days. Your body is still remembering how to be one person instead of two." The chair by the fire creaked, not the squeak of a wheelchair wheel, but the shifting of leather under weight. A figure stood up. Violet's breath caught in her throat. Sebastian walked towards the light. He didn't drag himself. He didn't stumble. He moved with a predatory, fluid grace that was almost too smooth to be human. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were no longer scarred maps of agony, but strong and unblemished. He stopped at the foot of the bed. The transformation was absolute. The hollowness in his cheeks was filled out, the grey pallor of his skin replaced by a healthy ivory luminosity. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. Gone was the terrifying, blood-starved crimson. In its place was a deep, iridescent violet, the colour of twilight, the colour of her name. "Your eyes," she whispered, her voice raspy. "A side effect," Sebastian said softly, walking around the bed to sit beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. "Golden blood doesn't just heal the body, Violet. It rewrites the spirit. When you forced me to feed, you didn't just give me blood. You gave me a piece of your soul." He reached out, his hand hovering over her cheek. This time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. His skin was warm, hot even. The icy chill of the grave was gone. "I almost killed you," he said, his voice dropping to a rough, tortured whisper. The hunger was... it was a madness. If Mrs. Higgins hadn't physically pulled me off you, I would have drained you dry. I would have traded the only thing that matters for a few more years of life. "I offered," she said firmly, covering his hand with hers. "It was my choice, Sebastian. I'm a hunter's daughter, remember? We don't run from the teeth. We face them." He looked at her then, a mixture of awe and devastation on his face. "Why? After everything? After the lies?" "Because," she said, looking into those new, violet eyes, "my whole life I was a currency. To my father's debtors, to Catherine, even to Renfield. I was something to be traded. But you, even when you were starving, even when you were broken, you tried to send me away. You were the first person who tried to save me." She sat up, ignoring the dizziness, and pulled his face toward hers. "And because," she breathed, "I think I love you, Sebastian Croix." He froze. For a creature who had lived for centuries, he looked like a boy hearing a secret for the first time. Then, a low growl rumbled in his chest, possessive and adoring. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a claiming. It was the taste of rain, iron and fire. It was the seal on a contract that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with eternity. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathless. "I love you, Violet Sterling," he vowed into the silence, "and I swear by the blood we now share, no one will ever sell you again. No one will ever make you feel small." His expression hardened, shifting from lover to king in a heartbeat. The violet in his eyes darkened to a stormy indigo, starting with the woman who tried to sell us both to the slaughter. 3 weeks later, the Sterling penthouse in Manhattan was vibrating with the sound of string quartets and polite, fake laughter. It was the social event of the season. Catherine Sterling was celebrating her financial recovery, a recovery funded entirely by the down payment she had received for Violet's life. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than Violet's college tuition would have been, holding court in the center of the room with Jessica by her side. Violet watched them from the shadows of the foyer. She was wearing a gown Sebastian had commissioned for her, midnight blue velvet, strapless, with a slit that went up to her thigh. Around her neck, covering the faint scars of Sebastian's bite, was a choker of diamonds and sapphires that weighed as much as a brick. "Are you ready?" Sebastian asked. He stood beside her, a dark shadow in a bespoke tuxedo. He radiated power so intense that the air around him seemed to hum. "I'm ready," she said. The heavy double doors swung open. They walked in. The effect was instantaneous. As they moved into the light, the conversation died. The string quartet faltered and stopped. All eyes turned to them, the resurrected king and his hunter queen. Catherine turned, a glass of champagne halfway to her lips. When she saw Violet, the glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. "Violet," she whispered, her face draining of colour. She looked at Sebastian, standing tall, walking without a cane, looking more like a god than a man, and she began to tremble. "Mr. Coir, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Sebastian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it projected to every corner of the room. "Since the last time we spoke, you had sold my location to Vaga assassins in hopes that they would kill me before I could collect the rest of your debt." A collective gasp ripped through the room. The wealthy elites of New York clutched their pearls. "That's a lie!" Catherine shrieked, her composure shattering. "He's lying. Violet, tell them. Tell them he's a monster." "The only monster in this room, Catherine," Violet said, her voice steady and cold, "is the woman who sold her daughter to cover a gambling debt." Violet stepped forward. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked right up to Catherine. She looked small now. "Pathetic. I did what I had to do for this family," she hissed, backing away until she hit the buffet table. "You did it for yourself," Violet corrected. Sebastian stepped up beside her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document. He tossed it onto the table next to the hors d'oeuvres. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "That," Sebastian said, "is the deed to this building, and your summer home in the Hamptons, and the cars downstairs." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I bought your debt from Renfield this morning, Mrs. Sterling. All of it. The interest rates were astronomical. You are currently in default." Catherine sank to her knees. It was a beautiful sight. "Please, have mercy. We have nowhere to go. I have a daughter to protect." "You had 2 daughters," Sebastian said coldly, "and you threw one to the wolves. Literally." "Violet, please." Jessica grabbed Violet's arm, tears streaming down her face. "We're sisters. You can't let him throw us on the street." Violet looked at Jessica's hand on her arm. She remembered all the times she had watched Catherine lock her in the basement and done nothing. She remembered the pills she let Violet take the blame for. She gently removed her hand. "We aren't sisters, Jessica," Violet said softly. "We're just strangers who shared a bathroom." She turned to Sebastian. "I don't want them on the street." Sebastian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Mercy, my love. After everything." "No," Violet said. "Justice." She looked down at Catherine. "Sebastian owns you now. The contract stands, a life of service for the debt owed." Catherine looked up, hope sparking in her eyes. "Service? You mean I can work? I can be a personal assistant? An event planner?" Violet laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "No, Catherine. Mrs. Higgins is getting old. She needs help at Blackwood Hall. The castle has 40 rooms. The floors are stone and need to be scrubbed by hand. The gargoyles haven't been cleaned in a century. And the winters, well, the heating is terrible in the servants' quarters." Catherine's mouth fell open in horror. You expect me to be a maid? I am a socialite. I am a Sterling." "Not anymore," Sebastian said, signaling to his security team. "Now you are the help." 2 large men stepped forward, hoisting the screaming Catherine and the sobbing Jessica by their arms. "Get your hands off me!" Catherine screamed as they dragged her toward the exit. "Violet, you ungrateful, wretched girl, I saved you. I made you who you are." "You're right," Violet said to her, retreating back. "You taught me that the world is cruel. And now, I'm showing you that I learned the lesson." The doors slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The room remained silent. The guests stared at them with a mixture of terror and reverence. They knew in that moment that the hierarchy of the city had shifted. Sebastian offered Violet his arm. "Shall we go, my queen? The car is waiting." She took his arm, feeling the solid, unbreakable strength of him. She looked around the room one last time, at the world she used to envy, the world that had rejected her. It looked so small now. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Let's go home." We walked out into the cool New York night, the wind catching the velvet of Violet's dress. They say fairy tales end with the princess being saved by the knight. But as she walked beside the vampire king, his violet eyes shining in the dark, she knew the truth. She wasn't the damsel. She wasn't the victim. She was the blood in his veins, the fire in his heart, and the lady of Blackwood Hall. And for the first time in 18 years, she wasn't just surviving. She was ruling. And that is the story of how a signature on a damp piece of paper changed the fate of the vampire king forever. It turns out, the strongest magic isn't in spells or curses. It's in the choices we make when our backs are against the wall. Violet didn't just survive. She conquered. I hope you enjoyed this darker take on romance and revenge. If you felt that spark, or if you just really enjoyed seeing that evil stepmother get exactly what she deserved, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Violet's shoes? Would you have saved Sebastian, or let the hunter instinct take over? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay safe in the shadows.